Finish this floor by noon, or pack your things. Her voice sliced through the lobby like a blade. Every sound died at once. The echo of her heels, the drip of a mop, even the hum of the vending machine gone. All eyes turned toward the janitor kneeling near the center of the marble hall, his hands steady on the handle, his face calm, unreadable. He didn't look up right away. He wrung out the mop, spread one deliberate stroke, then finally met her stare. "I was almost done," he said softly. The CEO crossed her arms. "Almost doesn't count here. Clients arrive at 12. I want this floor spotless before they step in." A few employees shifted, hiding grins behind paper cups. Someone whispered, "Old man's about to lose it." But he didn't. He simply checked the clock, 11:06, and spoke again, the same calm tone that somehow carried through the whole room. "If you want it finished by noon," he said, "you might want to ask the architect who designed it. He'll tell you the polish takes 4 hours to cure." The smirks vanished. The CEO blinked, thrown for a moment. "Excuse me?" He stood slowly, resting the mop upright like a cane. "I helped lay this marble 20 years ago. If you rush the cure, the shine will fade before the guests even arrive." The silence grew thick. Even the janitor's reflection stared back from the half-finished floor. She folded her arms tighter. "Then maybe we need someone faster than you." He nodded, not angry, not afraid, just certain. "Speed's easy, ma'am, but quality lasts." She turned away, face unreadable, but the control she wore like armor suddenly looked fragile. He dipped the mop again, whispering mostly to himself. "Some things still shine slow." For the first time that morning, she didn't have a comeback. The room felt different, like the air itself had remembered what respect sounded like. "From where are you watching around the world? Let me know in the comments below." The mop clattered softly as he rolled the bucket back into the supply room. His name tag read Harris, though most people never used it. To them, he was just the janitor. By noon, the office chatter had already shifted to lunch plans and deadlines. Nobody mentioned what happened that morning. Nobody ever did. Harris clocked out for his short break and stepped outside. He sat on the low wall by the parking lot, opened a paper bag and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil. It was yesterday's bread. Still good enough. He checked his phone. One missed call from the pharmacy. He already knew what that meant. Another refill for his wife's medication. Another night shift needed to pay for it. Once, long ago, he didn't need this job. He used to run a small flooring business with 5 workers and a steady stream of contracts. His hands had laid tile in hotels, banks, even government halls. But one delayed payment, one dishonest client, and everything he'd built collapsed. The stress broke his heart before the bankruptcy did. When his wife got sick, he sold his tools to cover her hospital bills. The company went under, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any failure. He never told anyone here about that life. He figured people respected silence more than stories they couldn't relate to. Around this building, respect was currency and he had none left to spend. Still, he worked like the place mattered. He polished the same corridors the CEO's shoes crossed every morning. He knew the rhythm of the elevators, the sound of each department's laughter. He could tell who was kind by how they left their coffee cups. A few younger employees liked him. One in HR always greeted him with a smile. One intern sometimes brought him tea. But mostly he was invisible. That suited him fine. He'd learned long ago that being unseen wasn't the worst thing. Being dismissed was. Inside, people called him the quiet one. Outside, he was a man counting coins for medicine, remembering the echo of power tools and the smell of fresh sealant. The world had moved on, and he'd become part of the background noise that kept it running. That morning's scene with the CEO kept replaying in his head. He didn't hate her. He pitied how fast she spoke, how loudly she needed to prove control. He saw a younger version of himself in that arrogance, the one who thought hard work alone could force respect. The difference was, he'd already learned what happens when pride becomes your compass. He finished the sandwich and looked down at his palms, rough, cracked, but steady. They still remembered the feel of stone, the patience it took to make something shine. Back inside, a coworker in uniform nodded as he passed. "Rough morning, huh?" Harris just smiled. "Could have been worse. Floor's still standing." The man chuckled and wheeled his cart away. As the clock ticked toward another late shift, Harris picked up his mop again. The marble gleamed faintly beneath the lights, half reflection, half memory. He thought of his wife back home, her quiet strength when she said, "Don't come home tired, come home proud." He whispered the words again under his breath like a prayer. Proud. That was what kept him steady, more than money, More than praise. Just the chance to leave something clean, something cared for, even if nobody noticed. That night, when the office emptied and silence returned, he caught his own reflection in the floor. For a moment he almost saw the man he used to be, the craftsman, not the janitor. Then the reflection faded with the motion sensor lights, leaving him alone with the hum of machines. He didn't mind the loneliness. It was honest. It didn't lie about who he was. And yet deep down, some part of him still wondered, how long can quiet dignity survive in a place that only hears loud voices? He dipped the mop again, slow and steady, unaware that tomorrow those same quiet hands would uncover a truth no one in that building was ready to face. "Let's make this interesting," the CEO said, loud enough for the entire corridor to hear. Harris stopped mid-swipe, mop handle resting in his hands. He already knew that tone, the kind bosses used when they weren't asking, just performing. She smiled thinly. "We've got the investor tour tomorrow. New contracts, major press coverage. I need this lobby to look like a mirror. You think you can handle that?" He nodded once. "Of course." "No," she said, stepping closer, voice rising. "I mean the entire marble floor. Every tile, every hallway from the elevators to the conference wing, all by yourself. Done by morning." A few executives slowed their steps to listen. One whispered, "That's impossible." The CEO kept her eyes on him. "Consider it a test. If you finish, there'll be a bonus. If you don't, we'll talk about whether this job is still a good fit." The hallway went still. Even the intern stopped typing at the reception desk. Harris didn't react. He just studied the pattern of the marble beneath him, the same pattern he'd designed years ago when this building was still under construction. He remembered spending nights here as a contractor, proud of the way the floor caught the morning light. Now the woman who walked across it without noticing was daring him to polish it faster than it could ever be done. He lifted his eyes, calm. "When do you want me to start?" She blinked, surprised by his lack of resistance. "Now, if you need extra materials, order them. Just send the receipts. I want perfection by 8 a.m. He nodded again. "Perfection takes patience, ma'am." Her expression tightened. "Then you'd better learn to hurry your patience." Laughter rippled through the small crowd. Harris didn't join them. He just turned, pushed the bucket forward, and began clearing the hall, slow, methodical, the same way he always did. When the elevator doors closed behind the executives, one of the guards leaned near him. "You gonna take that? She's setting you up to fail." Harris shrugged. Maybe she just wants to see how clean a floor can really get. The guard chuckled softly, but his eyes held worry. "Man, that's a setup if I ever saw one." Harris kept working. "Then I'll give her a setup worth remembering." He knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't about the floor. It was about control, public humiliation dressed as a challenge. But he also knew something she didn't. Beneath that polish and wax were micro cracks that could only be fixed by hand, with a mix he'd invented years ago. That night when everyone left, he opened the small locker in the maintenance room. Inside were a few worn-out rags, a half-empty bottle of sealant, and an old wooden box with brass corners. He hadn't touched it in years. Inside lay his old tools, a hand buffer, custom brushes, and a bottle of marble compound mixed to his own formula. The smell alone brought back memories. His father teaching him how to listen to the stone. He set the tools down carefully. "All right, old friends," he muttered, "let's dance one more time." By midnight the building was quiet. Only the hum of machines and the rhythm of his steps filled the air. He moved tile by tile, restoring not just the shine but the soul of the place. He lost track of time, lost in the work, the kind that demanded both strength and tenderness. Around 2 a.m., the security camera light blinked red. Someone was watching from the upstairs monitor room. Maybe the CEO herself couldn't sleep, checking to see if he'd quit. He didn't. He just kept working. By dawn, half the floor gleamed like water. The other half waited in silence, like it trusted him to finish. At 6, the intern from HR arrived early and stopped at the door. "You're still here?" Harris smiled faintly. "Almost done." She looked at the floor and gasped. "It's beautiful. I've never seen it look like that." He nodded. "It always looked like this. People just stopped looking." When the CEO entered at 7:30, the reflection of her heels shimmered across the polished marble. For a second, even she seemed caught off guard by the sight. Then her tone snapped back. "You're not finished." He straightened, wiped his forehead. "Not yet. The shine's settling."
"The what?"
"The shine," he said. "It needs to rest before it stays." She folded her arms. "You're full of excuses, aren't you?" He gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. No, ma'am, just experience. The investors would arrive in half an hour. The floor was nearly perfect, but she wanted flawless, and perfection, he knew, always demanded a price. As he knelt again, the intern whispered from behind, "Why are you letting her treat you like that?" He didn't look up. "Because sometimes you don't fight power with words. You let the work speak first." And it would. Just not yet. Still not done. The voice came from behind him, sharp, playful, the kind that feeds on someone else's exhaustion. Harris didn't need to turn. He recognized the assistant's tone. "Almost," he said quietly, running the buffer one last time over the edge of the marble. The assistant chuckled. "You know, my followers love this stuff. Real grind culture. Maybe I'll post a clip when your janitor takes his job too seriously." A phone camera clicked. Harris didn't look up. He'd been at it since dawn. The building smelled faintly of polish and silence. His shoulders ached, but the shine spreading beneath him gave him strength. Tile by tile he'd been erasing years of neglect, uncovering the floor's true face. Around noon, a group of executives walked by, chatting loudly about lunch reservations. One of them whistled. "Wow, you're still here? At this rate you'll be polishing till retirement." The others laughed. The CEO wasn't with them, but her shadow hung in their voices. Harris paused long enough to breathe, then resumed. He didn't answer. He'd learned that silence cuts deeper than argument, but silence doesn't protect you from bad luck. He refilled the bucket, added a small amount of solution, and rolled it toward the west corner. A flicker from the overhead light caught his attention. It had been blinking all week. He meant to replace once he was done, but the thought passed. The next moment, the bulb popped. Startled, Harris turned, the bucket tipping just enough to spill. The liquid spread faster than he could stop it, seeping into a freshly polished section. He lunged to steady the buffer. His shoe slipped, and his elbow hit the machine. The heavy buffer spun sideways, its pad catching the wet marble and streaking across the surface with a screech. A wide, dull mark carved through the shine he'd spent all night building. For a second he just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the ruined section. It was like watching days of pride dissolve into nothing. The assistant's laughter broke the silence. "Oh man, that's going viral." Harris glanced up. The phone was still recording. "Stop filming," he said evenly. But the assistant only grinned wider. "Hey, relax. It's just a joke." The elevator dinged. The CEO stepped out, heels clicking. She froze when she saw the smear across the marble. "What happened here?" The assistant lowered his phone instantly, his smirk vanishing. He slipped. Her gaze shifted to Harris. "You destroyed it." He shook his head. "It was an accident." "The light." "An accident," she cut in. "Do you realize this floor was supposed to be perfect for the tour? I trusted you, and this is what you deliver?" A few employees gathered at the edge of the lobby, drawn by the sound of her voice. Harris felt their eyes on him, the same way he'd felt them years ago when his company collapsed, when the world looked at him like he was the failure, not the system that broke him. He took a breath. "Ma'am, it can be fixed. I just need—" "You've had enough chances." Her words were final, cold. "You're suspended until further notice. Leave your badge with security." The assistant looked away. Nobody else spoke. Harris's hand tightened around the mop handle. For a moment he wanted to fight back, to tell her she'd just undone work that no one else could ever redo. But what was the point? He set the handle down gently. Understood. He walked toward the supply room, every step echoing heavier than the last. Behind him, the CEO muttered, "We'll call a contractor. Someone who knows what they're doing." Those words hit harder than the fall itself. In the locker room, Harris sat alone for a long while. His uniform stuck to his back. His hands trembled not from anger, but from the ache of realizing he'd been here before. The day he lost his business, the same sentence had ended it. "We'll find someone else." He stared at his reflection in the metal locker door. The man looking back was older, quieter, but the wound inside hadn't aged a day. When he finally stood, he packed his small toolbox. Inside lay the same hand buffer that had built this floor decades ago. It had survived every failure until today. He left the badge on the table and stepped into the hallway. No one stopped him. No one thanked him. The marble behind him shimmered unevenly, half bright, half dull, like a mirror refusing to lie. At the exit he paused and looked back once. The CEO was still there, giving orders, her voice sharp, her reflection warped in the damaged tile. He whispered, almost to himself, "Speed's easy. Quality lasts." Then he walked out quietly, leaving behind the shine, the noise, and the part of himself that still believed hard work alone could earn respect. "Did you hear?" He slipped, messed up the whole thing. The gossip started before the floor had even dried. By Monday morning, everyone in the building had an opinion about Harris. Some said he'd been careless. Others whispered that the CEO had gone too far. Nobody really knew the truth, but everyone talked like they did. The CEO walked through the lobby that day with her usual confidence, but it felt thinner than before. The marble was spotless now. Contractors had come over the weekend to fix the damage, but the shine somehow colder, emptier. Her assistant tried to lighten the mood. "At least it's done, right? Investors loved it." She nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the security camera in the corner. She remembered the moment the floor cracked. The way Harris had looked at her before walking out. No anger, no excuses, just disappointment. It bothered her more than she'd admit. "He didn't even argue," she muttered. "Guess he knew he was done," the assistant replied. But that wasn't it. She'd dealt with people who begged, shouted, blamed others. Harris hadn't done any of that. He just accepted it. That quiet dignity haunted her more than if he'd yelled. Back at her desk, she tried to dive into numbers and presentations, but the thought kept returning. Why didn't he defend himself? Meanwhile, across town, Harris sat at his small kitchen table, a cup of cold tea in front of him. His hands rested on the wood, still rough with polish residue. The silence in the apartment was thick, broken only by the ticking wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. On the counter sat an old photo, his wife smiling beside a patch of newly tiled floor. She used to joke that he'd married stone before he married her. "At least marble doesn't talk back," she'd say, and he'd laugh, saying, "No, but it remembers your touch." He stared at the photo for a long time. Her eyes were still full of the belief he'd lost somewhere along the years. He rose, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small envelope filled with hospital bills. The total was circled in red. He did the math in his head, then shook it off. "No sense counting the same pain twice," he whispered. For the first time in years, he thought about quitting for good. No more mops, no more humiliation, no more pretending that work alone was enough to build dignity in a place that couldn't see it. He walked to the balcony and looked down at the street. Kids were playing with a soccer ball in the fading light. Their laughter carried something he hadn't felt in a while. Freedom without pride. He thought of his old mentor, the man who'd trained him in flooring decades ago. He could still hear his words. "There'll always be someone trying to rush your craft, Harris. Don't let their pace ruin your patience." Back then he hadn't understood how patience could be stronger than pride. Now he did. Pride breaks fast. Patience lasts. The phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. Probably another part-time job offering less pay for more hours. He wasn't ready to go back out there. He turned on the radio instead. A song from the 80s played. His wife's favorite. He smiled faintly, the kind that hurts and heals at the same time. He whispered, "You'd tell me not to give up, wouldn't you?" He imagined her reply. Calm, teasing, certain. "You don't stop shining because someone else can't see it." He closed his eyes, let the silence sit beside him. The loneliness wasn't cruel tonight. It was honest. Like old friends who don't need to speak. Back in the office, the CEO walked through the corridors again. Employees went quiet when she passed. She caught fragments of whispers. "Too harsh. Poor guy. Heard he's been here for years." She brushed it off, pretending it didn't matter. But when she reached the lobby, her heel caught a faint line across one of the tiles, a hairline crack, almost invisible. She crouched down, touching it. The floor had been repaired, yet something beneath it wasn't right. Her reflection stared back from the marble, flawless on the surface, fractured underneath. She stood up quickly and walked away. At home, Harris took one last look at his toolbox. He ran a hand over the worn lid. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away. It wasn't just tools. It was memory, discipline, identity. He placed it gently in the corner and whispered, "Maybe I'll rest a few days." But even as he said it, something inside him resisted. He knew rest wasn't the same as surrender. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The storm had passed, but the air still held the weight of what came after. A kind of stillness that wasn't peace yet, just waiting. He looked at the photo again and smiled softly. "All right," he murmured. "One more try. But this time not for them." The next morning, he'd wake with a decision. But tonight he sat quietly, letting patience fill the spaces pride once occupied. And somewhere downtown, the woman who'd fired him couldn't shake the sound of his last words. "Call him back," the maintenance chief said flatly. The CEO frowned. "Who?" "The janitor, Harris. The new guy's machine just flooded the east wing. The sealant didn't dry right, and the water system's leaking underneath the panels. She hesitated. Can't someone else handle it? He shook his head. Not unless you want the investors walking into a puddle. For a moment her pride wrestled with reason. Then she sighed. Fine, just for the repair. When Harris got the call, he didn't say much. Just a calm, I'll be there in an hour. He arrived carrying his small wooden toolbox, the same one he'd nearly packed away for good. No uniform this time, just plain work clothes, sleeves rolled, a quiet expression that said he came to do a job, not to revisit old wounds. The security guard who'd seen him leave nodded respectfully. Didn't think I'd see you again. Harris smiled faintly. Neither did I. Inside, the damage was worse than described. Water pooled under the machines, the marble dulled from overpolish. The new hire stood nearby, nervous, holding a manual upside down. Unplug it, Harris said calmly. Before you fry the motor. The young man obeyed instantly. Harris knelt, wiped the floor with a dry cloth, and tapped the surface twice. The sound told him what he already suspected. The sublayer had trapped air bubbles from rushed rushing. He opened his toolbox, pulled out a thin metal rod, and began clearing the air vents beneath the tiles. Every motion was steady, precise. The intern from HR, the same girl who once brought him tea, watched curiously from the hallway. You really know what you're doing, she said. He gave a small chuckle. I should. I built half of it. Her eyebrows lifted. You built this floor? He nodded. Years ago, when the building first opened. Different company name back then. Same marble, same mistakes. The CEO approached quietly, heels soft this time, not sharp. She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, but the authority in her stance was softer now, more like curiosity than command. How long will it take? She asked. Depends, Harris said without looking up. If the air pockets spread, we'll need to reseal. If not, a few hours. You sure? He met her eyes for the first time since being suspended. I don't guess, ma'am. I listen. Floors talk when you let them. The intern smiled. That sounds like poetry.
It's patience,
he corrected gently. Stone remembers the hands that touch it. If you rush it, it cracks. If you respect it, it shines. The CEO said nothing, but her gaze lingered on the way he worked. There was a stillness around him, the kind that made even the noise of machines feel respectful. An hour later, the leak was contained. Harris had resealed the section, drained the excess, and polished the damaged part by hand until the reflection returned clear. The intern crouched beside him. Can I ask something? Sure. Why didn't you tell anyone you were the one who built this floor? He thought for a moment. Didn't seem like it would matter. People see what they expect to see. She frowned. That's not fair. He smiled faintly. Life isn't always fair, kid. But work can be. The CEO's assistant passed by, pretending to check his phone. He avoided eye contact, his earlier arrogance gone. When Harris finished, he packed his tools slowly, inspecting each one before closing the box. Should hold for a while, he said, but you might want to keep the buffer speed lower next time. Machines are fast. Floors aren't. The CEO hesitated. I'll remember that. He gave a polite nod. Good. I'll send the invoice tomorrow. She almost smiled. Almost. You're still billing us. Work's work, ma'am, he said simply. Free labor doesn't teach respect. The intern tried not to laugh. The CEO turned slightly, hiding a grin she didn't mean to show. As Harris headed toward the exit, she called after him. Wait. He stopped, looked back. I didn't thank you last time, she said quietly, for the work you did before everything. He studied her expression, genuine, restrained, awkward in its honesty. You just... Then he walked out, leaving her standing there, watching the reflection of her own face ripple in the freshly repaired marble. For the first time she saw it, the difference between shine and substance. The intern turned to her and said softly, You think he'll come back full time? The CEO didn't answer right away. If he does, she said finally, I'll make sure we don't waste the lesson twice. And somewhere down the hallway, Harris allowed himself one small private smile, the kind that comes not from winning but from knowing patience had finally spoken louder than pride. But deep down, he also knew peace never lasts long in places that worship speed. And soon, another test was waiting, one that would break more than marble. Show me how you did that again, the intern said, crouching beside him. Harris smiled faintly. It's not about pressure, it's about rhythm. You press too hard, the polish clouds, too soft and it won't seal. She watched as he worked, hands steady, motion slow, but sure. The hallway, once cold and tense, now carried a quiet hum of cooperation. People who used to rush past without noticing him now paused to greet him, curious about the man who had saved their building from another disaster. Even the security guard from the front desk brought him coffee each morning. For the floor whisperer, he'd joke. Harris would just laugh softly. Over the following days, he trained the intern more than anyone expected. She asked questions not out of formality, but from genuine respect. "Why do you take so long on each section?" He looked up and said, "Because everything worth keeping takes time. People forget that. Companies too." The simplicity of his words carried more weight than lectures ever could. Soon small changes began to ripple through the workplace. Employees started taking better care of their spaces. Litter bins weren't overflowing. Desks were tidier. Conversations were lighter. It wasn't just the floor he was repairing, it was the air between people. The CEO noticed it first, without wanting to. The energy in her morning meetings felt different. Laughter replaced stiffness. Even she felt it, though she didn't understand why. She passed by one afternoon as Harris and the intern were kneeling by the reception area. They were testing a new finish compound he'd mixed from memory. She watched for a moment, saying nothing, but her eyes softened at the way he guided the intern's hand. Gentle, patient, without an ounce of condescension. The intern smiled when she saw her. "Look, he made the new sealant by hand. It's smoother than the factory one." The CEO crouched slightly, curious despite herself. "How do you even know what to mix?" Harris shrugged. "Old habit. When you've built something from the ground once, you remember what it needs when it breaks." She tilted her head. "You say that like you've been doing this your whole life." "I have," he replied simply. She hesitated. "Where did you work before this?" He paused, considering whether to answer. "I owned a company. Small flooring business. We did commercial buildings mostly." The intern's eyes widened. "You owned one?" He nodded. "Until we didn't. A bigger firm bought us out. Said it was strategic acquisition. I kept the name for a year, then it disappeared." The CEO froze at that phrase. Her voice lowered. "What was it called?" "Marblecraft Industries," he said quietly. Her heart sank. That name sat deep in her company's old files, one of the smaller acquisitions her firm had made years ago to corner the local market. She remembered the internal memo. Marblecraft doled under financial pressure. Staff released post-merger. And now, here he was. The man who'd built the very foundation of her building, polishing floors under her command. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then, softly, "You worked for my firm, didn't you?" He smiled without resentment. "No, ma'am, you worked for mine." She exhaled slowly, eyes dropping to the marble. "I didn't know." He shook his head. "You couldn't have. That was a long time ago. Companies change names faster than people change hearts." She wanted to apologize but couldn't find the words. Something about his tone, the lack of bitterness, the quiet dignity, made it clear he didn't need her pity. "I didn't mean for," she began. He interrupted gently. "You don't have to explain. You didn't take anything from me. Time did." The intern stood awkwardly between them, sensing the weight of history she didn't fully understand. Finally, the CEO said, "You could have told me." He smiled again. "Would it have changed anything?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. No, it wouldn't have. She'd been too focused on metrics, optics, performance reviews. She'd have seen him as a number, just like everyone else. As she walked away, she heard him tell the intern, "People like to say success builds character. I think it only reveals it." That line stayed with her for the rest of the day. Over the week, she found herself walking slower through the lobby, noticing details she'd never seen. The way the morning light caught the marble, the way people greeted each other now, the way laughter echoed where tension used to live. Harris had become more than an employee. He was a quiet compass resetting the tone of her entire company. One evening, as most people left, she approached him again. "You ever think about starting over?" He looked at her, surprised. "At my age?" She smiled faintly. "At any age." He thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe, but I'd rather help others start right. I think that's the better ending." She nodded, genuinely moved. "You've changed the place. You know. Not just the floors." He glanced at her reflection in the polished marble. "Floors don't stay clean on their own. Neither do people. You just have to keep showing up." As he packed his tools, she said softly, "You said earlier that stone remembers the hands that touch it. I hope this one remembers yours." He looked at her, then the floor. "It already does." And as she left, She noticed something strange. The marble beneath her feet seemed to glow warmer than usual, as if it too had learned the difference between polish and pride. Harris stayed behind a while longer, finishing the last section of the hallway. The intern waited quietly beside him. "You think she'll ever really understand?" she asked. He smiled. "Understanding takes time. But I think she's listening now." He dipped the mop smooth and steady, the way a craftsman paints faith into his work. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring another test, one that wouldn't just measure patience but trust. And this time, the cracks wouldn't come from the floor. "Who spilled the compound?" The shout came from the far end of the lobby, sharp enough to freeze conversation. Harris turned, cloth in hand, to see a cluster of managers huddled around a chemical drum, the acrid smell of polish pulling the air. A slick line of liquid spread across the floor, fresh, corrosive, eating faint marks into the marble surface. "I didn't authorize this batch," one manager barked. "Who left the storage unlocked?" The PR officer, a man named Ryan, crouched to inspect the spill. His tone carried just enough volume to draw attention. "This looks like one of Harris's mixtures. The stuff he'd been experimenting with lately." Heads turned instantly. Harris frowned. "That's not mine. I store my materials in the service room. They're sealed." Ryan stood, wiping his hand on a paper towel. "Maybe you forgot to lock it. Accidents happen." There it was, that practice smirk. The same kind he'd worn when the CEO first rehired Harris. Ryan had never liked the way everyone started listening to the janitor instead of him. The CEO entered moments later, flanked by two assistants. Her eyes narrowed as she saw the damage. "What happened?" Ryan stepped forward. "We traced it back to the maintenance supplies. The chemical tags match the batch Harris made last week." "That's not possible," Harris said calmly. "My compound's non-corrosive. I can prove it." Ryan shrugged, feigning concern. "With all respect, we found the open container under your name tag. Maybe a mix-up, maybe carelessness." The CEO's gaze hardened. "You're saying he caused this?" Ryan nodded gravely. "Whether by mistake or not, it's a liability. Media's already here for the press tour. If this leaks, pardon the pun, we'll be trending for the wrong reason." The word media hit her like a warning bell. Investors, cameras, perception. Everything she built revolved around control. She turned to Harris. "Is it true?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Someone's lying." Her jaw tightened. "Do you have proof?" He looked at the line of polished tiles, proof of weeks of dedication, and then at the faces around him. Not one person spoke. The intern looked ready to, but Ryan shot her a glare that silenced her. Harris's voice stayed steady. "You trusted me once already. That's all I have left to offer, my word." The silence stretched. Her eyes flickered with conflict, but fear won over fairness. "Until we sort this out, I'll have to let you go." It wasn't shouted this time. It was quieter, worse somehow. He nodded slowly. "I understand." Ryan exhaled dramatically, pretending relief. Tough call, but the right one. Damage control matters more than sentiment. Harris gathered his tools one last time. The intern rushed toward him. "You can't just leave. They know it wasn't you." He gave her a gentle smile. "Truth's slower than lies, kid, but it lasts longer." He glanced toward the CEO, who stood frozen, torn between apology and image. "Thank you for the chance to work again," he said simply. "I'll send a bill for the repairs I did, Dins." Then, with that same quiet dignity that had once unsettled her, he turned and walked away. The office was eerily silent. Even Ryan's smirk faded under the weight of what had just happened. Within hours, the PR team issued a statement. "Minor chemical mishap, issue contained. No injuries." The CEO approved it, but the words felt hollow. The floor looked clean again, yet something inside the building felt stained. That afternoon, employees exchanged uneasy glances. The warmth that had begun to grow during Harris's return vanished. The laughter stopped. The air thickened with regret. The intern sat at her desk, staring at her phone, the one with the photo she'd taken days ago of Harris mixing his compound, labeled carefully with safety seals intact. Her finger hovered over, but she hesitated. What if she lost her job too? Meanwhile, Ryan strutted through the lobby like a victor, making sure everyone heard him say things like, "Crisis handled," and "good riddance." Honestly, he was getting too comfortable. The CEO overheard him once and didn't correct him. She couldn't. Her own guilt was too fresh, and guilt prefers silence. That evening, she walked through the now empty lobby. The floor gleamed, but the shine felt cold. Hollow. She caught her reflection and whispered, "Why does this still feel wrong?" Because it was. Across town, Harris carried his box of tools back home. The streets were dim, the world ordinary again. He stopped outside his door, taking one deep breath before stepping inside. He placed the wooden box on the counter, sat down, and let the weight of the betrayal settle, not as anger but as tiredness. He wasn't surprised. The world rarely thanks patience twice, but disappointment doesn't sting as much when you've known it before. It just sits beside you like an old companion. He poured himself tea and looked at the reflection of his small lamp on the table. "You can polish a floor," he murmured, "but not a conscience." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "They'll learn, maybe not today, but truth, it doesn't rush either." Back at the office, Ryan presented his report to the CEO. "Crisis averted," he said proudly. "Media's off our back, we're clear." She nodded mechanically. "Good work." But as he left, she noticed a faint discoloration in the same area of marble, the so-called repair already fading. She knelt and touched it. The polish was uneven, thin, temporary. For the first time she realized what Harris meant when he said speed's easy, quality lasts. She whispered the line to herself, as if confessing to the reflection beneath her hand. And though she didn't know it yet, that small flaw, the one she touched just then, would become the crack through which the truth finally resurfaced. "Wait, this doesn't make sense." The intern's voice trembled as she scrolled through the security footage archive. The timestamps lined up perfectly with the day of the spill, but something was off. In one clip, the storage room door opened at 6:47 a.m., 2 hours before Harris had even clocked in. She hit pause. The frame caught Ryan, the PR officer, entering the room with a clipboard and a phone in hand. 10 minutes later, he left carrying the same chemical drum later blamed on Harris. Her heart raced. She knew what this meant, but she also knew what it could cost her. She transferred the footage onto a flash drive, slipped it into her pocket, and looked around. The office was nearly empty, the hum of computers the only sound. Her reflection on the monitor stared back at her, a mix of fear and determination. "All right," she whispered, "let's see who really listens to the truth." The next morning, she walked straight to the CEO's office. No appointment, no hesitation. The CEO looked up from her desk, surprised. "Something wrong?" "Yes," the intern said, steadying her voice. "And something right. Depends on what you do with it." She plugged in the flash drive and pressed play. The video spoke for itself. Ryan entering, tampering, leaving, the timestamp, the drum, the seal, all unmistakable. When the footage ended, silence filled the room. The CEO leaned back, eyes wide, the weight of realization crashing over her. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. "Security logs." It was archived under non-critical footage. Nobody checked because no alarm was triggered. The CEO rubbed her temples. "And no one else knows?" The intern shook her head. "Not yet. But I thought you should see it first." For a long moment the CEO didn't speak. Then she said almost to herself, "He told me truth doesn't rush. I didn't understand that." The intern frowned. "You mean Harris?" The CEO nodded slowly. "Yes. I didn't just fail him. I failed what he stood for." She stood and walked toward the window, the city stretching below her. "You know, I used to think running a company was about results, deadlines, optics. But that man, he was building something bigger than floors. He was building pride, the kind that doesn't need an audience." The intern hesitated. "There's something else you should know." The CEO turned. "What now?" She handed her another file. "I did some digging last night. I found old records, public archives. The company he used to own, Marblecraft Industries. Your firm bought it 20 years ago. The documents do he wasn't just an employee. He was the founder." The CEO's breath caught. "Founder?" "Yes. He designed the flooring system used in half the corporate buildings downtown. The same system we've been trying to maintain with cheaper material." The CEO sat down heavily. The truth hit her harder than the scandal ever could. All this time she'd been managing a man who once built the foundation she walked on. "He created this floor," she whispered, "and I humiliated him on top of it." The intern nodded. "He never said a word." The CEO's voice softened. "Of course he didn't. He wasn't proving anything. He was reminding us what integrity looks like." For the first time in years, the CEO felt small, but in a way that stripped away pretense, not pride. She saw herself not as a leader but as a student who'd ignored the lesson until it screamed in silence. She looked at the footage again, then at the intern. "We have to fix this." "How?" "First," she said firmly, "we clear his name, publicly. No more statements, no more spin. We tell the truth. even if it makes us look bad. The intern smiled. That's what he would have done. By noon, an internal memo went out. An hour later, a press statement followed. After reviewing new evidence, we acknowledge the wrongful dismissal of maintenance specialist Harris Cole. We deeply regret the oversight and are taking immediate action to make amends. Ryan was escorted out by security before the day ended. He tried to talk his way out, but the proof was undeniable. The staff watched quietly, not with gossip this time, but with respect for the justice finally done. Later that evening, the CEO sat alone in the lobby. The light from the setting sun washed over the marble floor, casting long reflections that seemed to stretch across time. She could almost hear his voice, calm, patient. Speed's easy, quality lasts. The words echoed, not as a reprimand but as a lesson she'd finally earned. She whispered to herself, "You were right." That night, she called the intern. "Find him. I don't care how far, just find him. Tell him the company wants him back. Not as staff but as consultant, as teacher, as whatever he wants to be." The intern smiled on the other end of the line. "Already ahead of you. I found his address in the old employee records." "Good," the CEO said. "Tomorrow morning, we go together." Before hanging up, she looked down once more at the marble beneath her feet. For the first time, it didn't look like flooring, it looked like history. And now she knew whose hands had written it. As she turned off the lights, the faint line from the earlier crack glimmered under the dim glow. But instead of shame, it looked like a scar, proof that something once broken could still hold strength. The next chapter of redemption was about to begin, not for a company, but for the people who finally learned that humility outlasts hierarchy. And somewhere across town, Harris sipped his tea, unaware that the truth he trusted had finally caught up with the same quiet patience that had guided his hands all his life. "Invite him in," the CEO said quietly. The receptionist blinked. "Now? During the investor tour? Especially now?" The words left no room for hesitation. The investors were already gathered in the lobby, men and women in tailored suits holding coffee cups and polite smiles. They were here to see profit margins, new innovations, and a speech about the company's legacy of excellence. What they didn't expect was the man walking in behind the CEO, a janitor carrying a small wooden toolbox. The room turned silent as Harris entered, his calm footsteps echoing against the marble he once built. He didn't wear a uniform today, just a pressed shirt and the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where he stood. The CEO gestured toward him. "This," she said, voice steady, "is Mr. Harris Cole. Some of you might recognize his name. Most of you won't, but every single one of you has walked on his work." Murmurs spread across the room. Harris stopped at the edge of the polished floor, eyes lowering slightly. He hadn't been told why he was here, only that his consulting expertise was needed for the event. The CEO continued. 20 years ago, before this company existed under our current name, it acquired a small flooring firm called Marblecraft Industries. That firm was founded by this man, the same man I dismissed not once but twice, because I didn't recognize the difference between a worker's hand and a leader's heart. The investors exchanged glances. The staff stood frozen in disbelief. The CEO's voice grew softer, but stronger. "Mr. Harris didn't just clean this floor. He created it. Every pattern beneath our feet, every reflection you see, came from his design, his patience, and his integrity. When we rushed his work, it cracked. When we listened, it shone." She turned to him fully, "And for that, Mr. Harris, I owe you not just an apology, but acknowledgement. This company owes its foundation to you." For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the lights. Harris met her eyes. He could see the sincerity there. Not rehearsed, not for show. Something had shifted in her since the last time they spoke. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "floors aren't built to remember names. They're built to carry weight. That's enough for me." The humility in his tone hit harder than any speech could. But the CEO wasn't finished. "No," she said firmly, "it's not enough. You taught us that speed is easy, but quality lasts. You showed us that leadership isn't power, it's patience. And today, I want everyone here to see what that means." She gestured to the dull patch of marble near the center, the same one that had been hastily repaired after his firing. "Would you show us the right way?" The crowd parted as Harris knelt, opening his old toolbox. Inside lay the familiar tools, brushes worn smooth, small bottles labeled in faded ink, the same hand buffer he'd carried through every hardship. He said nothing. He simply began to work. The sound of the cloth against stone was rhythmic, almost meditative. He moved with precision, applying a thin layer of compound, spreading it evenly. Every motion carried decades of discipline. The audience, executives and interns alike, leaned forward, watching the quiet art unfold. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The surface began to shift from cloudy to clear, from dull to luminous. The investors exchanged murmurs of amazement. The marble reflected their faces now, sharper, truer. The CEO crouched beside him. "You make it look effortless." He smiled faintly. "That's the trick. Effort shouldn't show, it should live in the result." Applause started softly from one of the interns, then another employee, then the entire lobby filled with clapping. But Harris only nodded once, standing slowly, his hands steady, his heart still. He turned to the CEO. "The shine will hold this time. You let it cure properly." The crowd chuckled softly, but beneath the humor was reverence. The CEO looked out at everyone. "You see," she said, "that's what happens when work meets respect, when patience leads instead of pride." She turned back to Harris. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to make this official. You're not coming back as janitor, Mr. Harris. You're coming back as our restoration consultant, and as the man whose name will be engraved on the plaque at this building's entrance." He blinked, caught off guard. "That's not necessary. It's overdue," she replied. The intern, standing near the front, couldn't help but smile through tears. Harris looked around the lobby, the same space where he'd once been humiliated, the same tiles that had borne witness to both arrogance and apology. He took a deep breath, then said softly, "If this floor can forgive what's been done to it, maybe we all can." The CEO's voice wavered, barely audible. "Thank you." He shook his head gently. "Don't thank me, just keep it honest this time." The applause rose again, louder, fuller, no longer polite, but heartfelt. For the investors, it was a moment of corporate humility they'd never seen before. For the staff, it was proof that decency still had a place in the modern workplace. And for the CEO, it was redemption. After the crowd dispersed, she walked over to him one last time. "You once said stone remembers the hands that touch it. I think people do too." He smiled. "Then let's both try to leave the right kind of marks." She nodded, eyes shining. "You already have." He packed his tools carefully, closing the wooden box with the same care he'd used to open it. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like an end, but a beginning written in patience instead of pain. As he turned to leave, the light caught the marble one last time. The floor gleamed, alive, unbroken, perfect in its imperfection. And above it all, the reflection of two people, once enemies, now equals, stood side by side, proof that true craftsmanship in work or in character never fades. Somewhere in the silence that followed, you could almost hear the floor breathe again. "I want you to stay," the CEO said softly. Harris looked up from the workbench where he was organizing his tools for the last time. "Stay. As facility director, or consultant. Whatever title you want," she said, almost pleading now. "You've earned that much." He smiled, that calm, knowing kind of smile that made everyone else slow down. "Titles never meant much to me, ma'am. I'd rather keep teaching the interns part-time. That's where the real foundation gets built." She opened her mouth to protest but stopped. There was something final in his tone, gentle, but certain. He turned a screwdriver in his hand thoughtfully. "I spent years fixing things I didn't break. Floors, systems, even people's tempers sometimes. But maybe what this place needs isn't another person in charge. Maybe it just needs someone who reminds them why they started working." The CEO's eyes softened. "Then let me at least pay you what you're worth." He chuckled. "Then you'll owe me more than the company can afford." She laughed quietly, a sound that carried both relief and regret. Over the next few weeks, things began to change. Slowly at first. The CEO replaced the company's Employee of the Month program with something new, the Foundation Award, recognizing quiet excellence, not loud results. Every quarter she shared a story about an employee who made things better when no one was watching. People started talking about values again. Not slogans on walls, real ones. She also made ethics training mandatory for management, not for compliance but for compassion. When she introduced the new policy, she quoted Harris directly. "Leadership is like polish. It's not about shine, it's about the time you're willing to put in when no one's clapping." The line went viral inside the company's intranet. It became their new motto. As for Harris, he did what he always did, showed up early, left late, and taught whoever asked how to do something properly. No shortcuts. The interns adored him. They called him Mr. H, and he'd shake his head pretending to dislike the nickname. He showed them not just how to buff marble, but how to treat work with respect. One afternoon, the CEO stopped by while he was teaching a small group. She stood at the doorway, unnoticed for a while, watching him show an intern how to read the texture of stone with just the fingertips. "You don't press against it," he was saying. "You listen to it. The grain tells you when it's ready. That's how you know you're not forcing something. It's agreeing with you." The interns nodded, mesmerized. When class ended, she approached. "Still teaching about marble, or about life?" He smiled. "They're not so different. If you rush either one, you end up with cracks." She handed him a small folder. "These are your new hours. 3 days a week, full creative control over training, and there's something else." Inside was a single sheet with a heading, Cole Mentorship Program, Building from the Ground Up. He blinked. "You named it after me?" She shrugged. "You built it. I just put your name where it belonged." For the first time he was silent, not from modesty but from quiet pride. He looked down at the page, tracing the printed words like an old craftsman, admiring the final polish of a job done right. "You're changing things," he said softly. "So are you," she replied. He set the folder down and looked at her. "You've learned faster than most leaders I've met. I had a good teacher." They stood there for a moment. No tension, no status, no pretense. Just two people who had both been wrong once, and brave enough to be better after. She broke the silence first. "When we tore down the old slogans last week, someone found your company's original motto under a layer of paint." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh," she nodded. "It said, 'Built to last, meant to serve.'" He smiled. "Didn't think anyone remembered that." "I do now," she said. He nodded slowly. "Then maybe my work here is done." She shook her head. "No, Harris. It's finally beginning." He laughed lightly, gathering his tools. "You know what my wife used to say? You can't fix people, but you can fix the way you show up to them." Guess we both learned that lesson the hard way. The CEO smiled. "Maybe that's the only way people learn what matters." He took one last look at the marble floor, the same one that had once been a battlefield of pride and pain. It gleamed now, steady and strong. "Funny," he said. "The shine looks different today." She nodded. "That's because we earned it." He turned toward the exit, toolbox in hand. "Keep it honest," he said. She replied softly, "Always." As he walked away, she didn't see defeat or goodbye. She saw something larger, something lasting. A legacy not of authority but of example. In the weeks that followed, the company thrived, not from campaigns or slogans, but from something invisible: trust. And whenever new employees walked through the lobby, they'd see a small brass plaque near the entrance. It read, "Dedicated to Harris Cole, the man who built the floor and the foundation beneath us all." He never asked for it. He never even mentioned it. But when he passed by on his teaching days, he would glance at it with a quiet smile, like a craftsman checking a floor that would hold for generations. "Mr. Harris, they finally mounted it," the intern said, smiling. He looked up from his stool, polishing rag in hand. "Mounted what?" "The plaque. By the main lobby doors." He chuckled quietly. "Took them long enough." She grinned. "It's perfect. Your name's right there under the renovation credits, in honor of the man who built the floor and the values beneath it. Everyone stops to read it on their way in." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept rubbing the same small circle of marble in front of him until it gleamed like glass. Then he leaned back and said softly, "Funny thing about marble, it remembers touch better than time." The intern tilted her head. "Meaning?" He smiled. "Every polish, every scuff, it tells a story. Doesn't matter how shiny it looks today, what matters is who cared enough to keep it that way." She nodded slowly, realizing he wasn't really talking about the floor anymore. Months had passed since the public reversal, and the company had changed in ways no memo could measure. The once tense office now carried an air of quiet respect. The new maintenance staff worked with pride instead of fear, and the interns, now trainees under the mentorship program, often quoted Harris's sayings as if they were management principles. The CEO still visited the lobby sometimes, though she no longer arrived with an entourage. She'd walk the floor alone, heels soft against the stone, pausing to look at the plaque before heading to her meetings. When she saw Harris, she always stopped, never for show, just a brief, honest exchange. One morning she found him in his usual spot. "I thought you'd retire by now," she said. He chuckled. "And miss all the free coffee?" "Not a chance." She laughed, shaking her head. "I think you enjoy being everyone's quiet legend." "I enjoy seeing people take care of what they once ignored," he said. "That's the real promotion." She grew thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, The part about not forcing things, just letting them agree with you. I think it applies to people too. He nodded. It does. Leadership's not about pressure, it's about patience. They stood together in silence for a moment, watching a new intern mop the far end of the hall with careful, deliberate strokes. The CEO smiled faintly. She reminds me of you. Harris shrugged. Good. Maybe she'll learn faster. A few steps away, the intern, his first student, called out, Mr. Reach, we're redoing the West Corridor next week. You'll check it before final coat, right? He smiled. Wouldn't miss it. The CEO turned to leave, pausing halfway to say, You know, the company's healthier now than it's ever been. Not because of the upgrades, because of the way people talk to each other. That's your doing, he said. No, she replied softly. That's yours. He didn't argue. He never did. He simply went back to his polishing, the quiet rhythm of cloth and stone filling the space between words. Later that evening, long after most had gone home, Harris stayed behind. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. He polished a small square of marble near the entryway, the same place where it had all begun. He wasn't rushing this time. No deadlines, no eyes watching, just the peace of doing something well because it mattered to him. The reflection on the floor caught his face, older, gentler, content. He whispered to himself, The shine's not for them anymore. It's for me. Outside, the lights dimmed for the night, and the building stood still, grounded by more than its foundation. It carried something invisible yet unbreakable, the legacy of patience, honesty, and quiet pride. And in that silence, the last line of his story seemed to hang in the air, one that belonged not just to him but to everyone who ever believed humility could outlast power. Tell us where you're watching from, and one word that describes how this story made you feel.